Gravity Circuit is to Mega Man X what Stardew Valley was to Harvest Moon, a successor that takes everything great from an established yet largely dormant or stale source material and then innovates on it. They update the gameplay, add long overdue mechanics and features, yet still manage to capture the feeling of why the original source material was so great. With both games, Stardew Valley and now Gravity Circuit, the final products don't just imitate the originals, they actually surpass them, leaving you with the lingering question of why you'd ever play the original again outside of nostalgia reasons. And that's still a valid reason. I occasionally mess around in some of the older Harvest Moon games from time to time, despite recognizing that they're inferior now. My hope is that Gravity Circuit will be seen as the new standard for what should be expected from the 2D action platforming genre, in the same way that Stardew Valley is seen as the standard for farming and life sims. Now, despite this high praise, I also want to state that Gravity Circuit is not flawless. It can be beaten in close to 6 hours, which is quite short if you are someone who only plays through games once. Additionally, aspects of its gameplay aren't as balanced as they should be, specifically the difficulty, which can be severely kneecapped quite early on, leaving the rest of the game feeling too easy. However, like Mega Man, much of its value comes in the form of replays and difficulty challenges, of which Gravity Circuit has many. If you're a fan of the older Mega Man series, particularly the original X like I am, then everything I've said up to this point should be enough for you to take the jump. I'm putting the spoiler warning here in the opening minute, however, because going into it with no knowledge of the surprises it holds is how I think it's best experienced. That's how I played it myself, and I'm thankful for that because even with its minor flaws, it's one of my favorite games I've played this year. If you love Mega Man, go purchase this game, you won't be disappointed. If you're still unsure and are okay with spoilers about level mechanics and gameplay unlockables, then stick around and hear the deeper explanation of why Gravity Circuit is worth your time. What Gravity Circuit does well and that sets it apart are 4 things. In order of their importance, first, great level design, second, a refined player kit that not only has a high skill ceiling but continues to expand as you progress, third, the game's wealth of customization options, and finally fourth, its story and setting. To be clear though with that last one, the story should not be the sole reason you play this game because although it does something unique with its concept that was unexpected and that I found interesting, the story is not the focus of Gravity Circuit, it's the gameplay, which copies much of its structure from Mega Man. After learning the basics of controls through a short prologue, you gain access to a base and a map screen where you'll see 8 different locations you can choose from, each representing a gameplay stage. Each level has a theme that is based around its location, meaning everything from its platforming, enemies, and ending boss will revolve around a specific theme. For example, one location is the city's power plant, which has been taken over by the evil virus army who seek to overload the plant's generators. The stage's main platforming mechanic is centered on these green lasers that electrify specific surfaces for a short period of time. This is introduced in a very simple way at the beginning of the level. A single automated turret fires a laser downwards at a small platform, electrifying it for several seconds before it returns to normal, rinse and repeat. The mechanic is then further evolved in different ways as the level progresses. Longer strings of platforming, tighter timing windows to safely make jumps, needing to match the speed of moving safe tiles, and the addition of spikes that don't just damage you but force a restart of the section. Each of the core 8 levels operate like this. The steelworks are filled with lava pits, moving platforms, and motion-triggered lasers that you often have to outrun. The junkyard has conveyor belts and compactors as well as a gel substance that locks you in place for several seconds. The mines have digger mech suits and collapsible floors. The warehouse leads into a Tron-like cyberspace where its platforming utilizes teleportation orbs, switches that activate surfaces, and a segment where the screen is upside down. The progression of the platforming is Gravity Circuit's highest achievement in my opinion, and the fact that each of the 8 levels feel unique is a testament to the developer's creativity. The consistent introduction of new and engaging gameplay mechanics results in the platforming remaining challenging for most of a playthrough, even despite many of the unlockables being designed to make it easier, such as the chip that allows you to double jump. After completing the core 8 levels, 3 additional stages unlock as part of the game's narrative, and it's these 3 that truly showcase how great Gravity Circuit's level design is, as they mix and match the mechanics from the previous stages together into longer and even more difficult challenges. Now, at the end of each stage is a boss fight against one of the game's primary antagonists, the Rebel Circuits, with each continuing the theme of the level. Returning to the power plant as an example, the boss Cable, or otherwise known as the Power Circuit, uses a sword as well as the lasers and electricity concept from the level. The floor tiles of the arena conduct electricity, meaning players can be damaged both by physical contact with Cable's attacks, but also from any electrical current that passes through the floor tiles. Each of the bosses have a moderate number of attacks that they can use, and once you've whittled away their first of 2 health bars, they each gain an additional unique move that requires quick reflexes from the player to dodge. Cable triggers a series of lasers that electrify the floor in a specific pattern, whereas Ray, the boss of the Steelworks, jumps to the center of the screen to unleash a massive heat cannon blast which eventually covers the majority of the arena, leaving just a small window of safety. This discussion on the bosses leads into the one real criticism I have for Gravity Circuit, that they, the bosses, quickly become trivialized by the upgrades players have available to them. Consider for a moment that the first boss I fought was Hash, the Cypher Circuit, whose stage is the cyberspace level I mentioned earlier. It took me 42 minutes and 27 attempts to finally beat him, and while I'm confident and aware that much of that was likely a skill issue on my part, stay with me because I want to build off of this information. The next boss I fought was Ray of the Steelworks, who took me 8 minutes and 7 attempts to beat. Then it was Cable, beaten in 6 minutes and just 3 attempts. While some of this could be attributed to just getting better at the game, I don't think all of it can be attributed to that. If you've played the game or played Mega Man, then you know some stages and bosses are more difficult than others, so you might assume those last 2 I mentioned, Ray and Cable, are just on the easier side. That's partially true, but I don't want to get accused of cherry picking with this, so let's take a look at Blade, also known as the Cooler Circuit. He's the boss of the Mountain Stage and is ranked in-game as the most difficult boss of the starting 8. He was the second to last boss I fought, and that fight took me just 2 attempts spread over 2 minutes to beat. It becomes too easy to just tank the bosses and not have to really learn their fights. The most extreme example of this can be seen with one of the bosses in the final 3 stages, the Circuit Crystal. This is one of the final bosses and serves as a gauntlet as the machine triggers each of the circuits you've collected from the rebels and forces you into back-to-back grueling rematches against all 8 of the previous bosses. Or at least I assume it was intended to be a grueling challenge. I wouldn't know because I beat the whole sequence on my first attempt by just brute forcing my way through each of the rematches, using a combination of technique moves like the barrier shield and upgrade chips like the one that makes you take less damage. One of my friends who had already completed the game was actually watching me during this level and was a bit frustrated to see I was able to complete the boss this way, just tanking massive amounts of damage, whereas he played quite meticulously during this fight. This is also not meant as the brag that it probably sounded like. I was playing the game on normal, but this comes to my point. These fights were all enjoyable, but none compared to the first one against Hash, where tanking the boss wasn't an option. I simply had to learn his moveset, be patient, and yes, get good. There are too many ways to unintentionally break the game's difficulty for yourself, especially on normal, which I consider to be the intended default difficulty option from the developers. And listen, I don't want all of the fights to take me 30 attempts either, that's not the point, but it's a wide middle ground between 30 attempts and just 1. Changing difficulty isn't unique to Gravity Circuit either. Mega Man could also be made easier by completing its bosses in specific orders. Doing so unlocked their weapons, which could be used to exploit the weaknesses of another boss. However, unless you were using a guide, you likely wouldn't know which bosses have weaknesses to which weapons on your first playthrough. Additionally, defeating certain bosses alters others' stages, creating variants that could have their own drawbacks. Gravity Circuit doesn't have anything like these factors, and that's not to say that it specifically needs them either. It's easy enough to start a second playthrough and make it more difficult using the mini modifiers and challenges that the developers have included. There's a dedicated hard difficulty, a new game plus, and an additional mode titled Circuit Mode, where special technique moves use health instead of energy. There's an unlockable armor color that makes you take more damage. You can avoid the secret health and energy upgrades hidden in each level. You could do a run where you don't purchase any upgrade chips or special technique moves. There's speedrunning the game or just specific levels, and as of the version 1.2 update, the developers have added even further difficulty options. There's a single credit mode with no respawning, so levels need to be completed in a single go, and then also in Iron Circuit mode, where you get 1 life and dying starts the entire game over. The wealth of customization features is one of the ways that Gravity Circuit actually surpasses Mega Man, and not just in difficulty modifiers, but actual features too. As of that 1.2 update, the developers added in an option to play new, remixed, and more difficult versions of each stage, as well as retooled enemies and boss movesets. This in particular might not seem that significant, but many of the levels are substantially more difficult, and the new attack patterns for enemies requires almost a rewiring of muscle memory from prior playthroughs. Both are incredibly substantial and almost felt like a brand new experience. Additionally, there are armor color chips to find on each stage that can add to your own moveset, allowing for things like infinite sliding, a ranged attack, a short teleportation, and many others. This is what I meant earlier by your toolkit continuing to expand as the game progresses. These are great additions that the developers have continued to add over a year later, which they are under no obligation to do. It's apparent how much they care about their product and that they want it to be the very best that it can be. Having upgrades and being able to craft different builds through the program chips, armor colors, and special technique moves is one of the best aspects of Gravity Circuit that again is unique to it. All that being said, however, I still can't shake that feeling of disappointment I had late in my first playthrough, where by just playing the game naturally, buying the chips and technique moves that seemed interesting, and by doing the levels in no particular order, I became overpowered. So overpowered that a pillar of the game's experience, the bosses, were effectively ruined for me until the final boss. And while it's easy to later start a second playthrough that is tuned to be more difficult, it feels a little unfair given that it's often the first playthrough that is the most memorable because the experience is completely unknown. In this way, the customization is at odds with the difficulty. I also want to clarify that I don't believe the game needs to be tuned to my specific preferences for difficulty. I'm just explaining my experience with the game and offering a tiny bit of criticism that came about from that experience. For other things Gravity Circuit does well, I found the story to be unexpectedly interesting. It obviously doesn't have an award-winning narrative, but I nonetheless enjoyed the world building about the history of the circuits and found the idea of the mechanical robot bodies just being the host for the attached circuit to be interesting. I enjoyed how the headquarters you return to between levels continued to expand and become a living place as you found more of the trapped robots in each stage. Petting the robot dogs and shooting hoops with the basketball were welcome distractions. The take-home message is this: Gravity Circuit as a product is excellent and worth every penny despite my criticism. I hope the developers are planning on a sequel or at least another large-scale update. If you enjoy Mega Man or just high-quality gaming experiences, then go play this game. You'll enjoy it. As always, thanks for watching. The next larger project will be Dishonored 2 finally, and will be followed up with its expansion Death of the Outsider. These two projects will take me a while, so between now and then, however, expect some smaller videos similar to this one. And take care.